Hi, this is Natalie Hoffman of FlyingFreeNow.com, and you're listening to the Flying Free Podcast, a support resource for women of faith looking for hope and healing from hidden emotional and spiritual abuse. Welcome to episode 34 of the Flying Free Podcast. Today I have with me Judy Herman, a speaker and the author of the book Beyond Messy Relationships. Judy's also a licensed professional counselor and mental health service provider, and today she is going to be giving us insights into family of origin stuff, how covert abuse shows up in couples counseling, as well as an important tool to help us get unstuck and move forward. If you stick around to the end, you'll find out how to get another free downloadable tool, as well as links to other helpful resources for your healing journey. Are you ready? Let's get started. Judy, I just want to welcome you to the Flying Free Podcast today.
I'm so glad to be here, Natalie. It is, I think, a divine appointment, actually. I think you have some awesome, brave women who are listening in, and I'm just very honored that you asked and very honored to be here. Thanks so much.
Oh, well, I'm really excited about the topic that we're going to be talking about today because it's something that I've actually been going back and working through myself, and it has to do with family of origin issues. And one of the things I've noticed for myself and for the women that I work with is that we figure when we're waking up and figuring out what happened in our marriage and what's going on there, it also uncovers a lot of stuff about our growing up years. And the patterns of behavior that we learned, you call it dances. Is that right? Dances of behavior or?
Yes, because we are the other part of that relationship whenever there's covert emotional abuse or spiritual abuse going on. We're the other side of that. And to be aware of those patterns that we've been groomed with, even in our early development, in our family of origins, our caregivers, our brothers or sisters, how we related and how we moved toward pleasure or away from pain is what we inadvertently take in to our adult relationships. And so it's so worthwhile to look back and see what our part is and raise our level of awareness.
Well, and especially because there are a growing number of women in my group, my private group, that are either divorced now or they are in the process of getting divorced. And many of them are asking the questions, how do I prevent this from happening again? A lot of these women got married when they were in their early 20s. I mean, we don't have a lot of life experience back then. We really don't know a lot about relationships other than what we experienced in our families. And so we tend to kind of, like you were saying, we tend to kind of follow those same patterns and maybe are even attracted to people that kind of remind us of what we are familiar with. Maybe even if we knew that our family wasn't completely healthy, we still thought it was normal. So can
Absolutely.
you talk a little bit about that?
Yes. Keep in mind, this is so very profound when I first learned about this. And in the recent years, all of us knowing more about the human brain and how it develops. And maybe most of you already know that the brain is not fully developed. It's still under construction until about the age of 25 years old. So it is impossible to have insights as an early 20 or even in your late teens if you got married then. But we have the capability of insights and looking back. Now, what happens when we are growing up in our families, okay, there's parts of our brains that we have conscious memory of and parts that we have unconscious memory. So when we get triggered in our adult relationships, we may not be able to even put the pieces of the puzzle together. What happens in the brain, it's a very primitive part of the brain in our development. So that part of the brain will tell us we're in danger. So we go into the fight, flight, or freeze mode of the brain. And then we develop stories around that. That's why I think it is so valuable to go back and go into our personal histories. A lot of us don't want to do that. And we think, well, the past is the past. I can't do anything about it now. But what you can do is reframe it. You now have the capability in your brain development to be able to, instead of seeing whatever perhaps some childhood abuse in the past, instead of seeing it through the eyes of a 5, 6, or 7-year-old in that mentality, you now have the ability to have a different story. That past can be reframed. Now, most folks do need to go to a therapist to help them with this. And so I guess what I want to say is, none of us really want to say, we don't want to dishonor our parents. We're thinking, and I get this all the time in my counseling office. So they're not like that now. They used to be, but they're not like that now. And then they're really fearful of saying anything negative or talking about those traumatic experiences. But we're not talking about blaming our family of origins, our parents, or those who cared for us. They're also limited as well. None of us grew up with a perfect childhood. But It's very important to have the insight with which, so to raise our level of consciousness, to raise our level of awareness, so that then we can make choices. When we're unaware, we can't be intentional or make choices that, have good judgment. And we can only look at the past. We can't look at the future, but we can gain some wisdom from a different perspective, a healthier story, so to speak.
What about, so you mentioned that people probably would need some help, some therapy to do this. But a lot of people, it is really hard to find a good therapist. I mean, I've tried several different people. I really haven't landed on anybody that I really resonate with, or that I gel with. And so either they were not skilled or experienced. And recently I found someone who was very skilled and very experienced, but her personality and my personality just were not compatible. So I don't know. What do you suggest for people when they're even looking for someone? And I know a lot of women have a counselor and they don't feel comfortable with them, but they don't know. They almost feel like, well, now I feel like I'll make this person feel bad if I don't go to them anymore.
Oh my goodness.
I've heard that. Yeah.
Yes. Oh my goodness. So yes, it is so important to get a good fit in a counselor. And I don't know. I heard some statistics way back that it takes about 5 different tries or trial and error to find the right therapist. Now
that's good to know, actually.
Yeah. So if you've disclosed to 1 or 2 they haven't been good fits, do not give up. And I actually have a blog post, and I can put it in the show notes, or you can put it in the show notes, about how to find the right therapist. It's important, yes, on all those levels. You got to be able to resonate personality-wise, and you've got to, even after a first session with that therapist, feel heard and understood. And as far as, offending your therapist, I just tell my clients all the time, you know what? You will not offend me. If we're not a good fit, and even after 2 or 3 sessions, it doesn't mean that you're married to me or married to my therapy. It would help if I knew what the glitch was, so that I can improve myself. But yeah, feel free to try others out. Now, also ask, if you're looking for a therapist, ask if they provide a free consultation, or schedule that very first appointment with the understanding that you are checking them out. You are hiring that therapist, and you do not owe them anything except for what you would pay for the session, of course. But don't worry about offending. Now, if you're going to offend your therapist, there's something wrong. That therapist also needs some therapy. That might be a question. And from this call, I would be glad to create some resources. What questions to ask a potential therapist?
Oh, that would be awesome.
That might be a really good resource, actually. And some questions you need to ask that therapist. Have you gotten therapy?
Right.
Because you know what? If they've not gotten therapy themselves, I would not quite trust that. They need to be on their own journey of awareness. Just because we're therapists and trained in mental health and licensed by our state boards and all of that does not mean that that they've got their act together.
Right.
Actually, it's that's one of my passions is to help other therapists because I come across it all the time. And I'm not saying I'm, the best or anything like that, but I am on this journey as a therapist to deal with my own stuff, and I do deal with my own stuff in my book for sure.
Yes.
I'm a client in my own book.
Yeah.
So
So I'll just interject here. Judy Herman has a newer book out. It's called Beyond Messy Relationships, Divine Invitations to Your Authentic Self. And the unique thing about this book is that it's kind of a memoir slash, self-help book in a way. She uses her own journey and as well as she intermingles her own personal journey. And she makes herself very vulnerable in this book, by the way, along with her perspective as a therapist. So the tools and the skills and the insights that she brings to the table as a therapist. So you get her own personal experience as well as these great tools and insights that you can apply to your own life. So it's a very unique book that way. I'm halfway through it and I've really been enjoying it. I have a couple of therapy questions for you.
Actually, can I go back to even writing the book? Because when I wrote the book, it was something that I was compelled. I couldn't not write the book because of a trauma I was experiencing in my life and in my marriage. But when I did, Natalie, I had a whole lot of anxiety, some sleepless nights, because my thought was, oh my gosh, if my clients read my book, they're going to say to me, and why are we seeing her as a therapist? It is a very vulnerable thing. Most therapists don't write their so openly and vulnerably. But
Right.
we have our issues. I got to tell you, we are like flawed people, and we have our issues. And there may be some things that you, as a client, if you do feel this vibe in a counseling session, you might be triggering something in this therapist. So be open. Let's not put you go to a therapist for expertise, and they should be able, right, to differentiate when they, when they are triggered, or be authentic with you in session. But if you feel something, it may not be you at all. Okay,
Right.
So I love the title of your book, Natalie. Yeah, is it me? Because it may not be you. It may be
Right.
your therapist. So anyway,
Right.
just to take us off the pedestal, but we're trained, and you deserve to have the right fit in a therapist.
Yes. Okay. So, I have a question. Do you ever, I'm sure you have experienced this, where you have a couple come in and they have marriage problems. How do you as a counselor, tell what's actually going on there? Because most of us who are listening to this podcast have been to couples counseling with a husband who has, or there may be listeners who are men who have a wife like this, where it actually looks in the counselor's office like the opposite of what's actually going on. So how do you as a counselor tell what's going on? Like, how do you know that there's covert abuse going on?
Good question. By the way, I'm going to say me too, because in that first marriage, and we were going to a therapist. I'm very thankful that the therapist did see some of this very clearly, but there are many therapists that miss it, and the spouse can come across as extremely charming, and if only she would this, then we would be fine. And so when those kind of things come up, and actually even in the dynamics of the conversation, I may notice things. I likely can spot things a mile away, maybe as compared to perhaps maybe other therapists who have had like nurturing and healthy and growing marriage. Mm-hmm. So I think that makes a difference on, yes, it's our therapy, but it's also our personal experiences and what we have attunement to. Now, if there's a lot of, and I talk about this in my book, there's basically three levels of coming into therapy. Number one would be, would like to have some tools to, our communication's breaking down. And that would be, maybe premarital couples. There's not some major things, but they are being proactive to come in, and so that they don't have, the disasters or, or tools with which to work through. So that's one category. And then the other category would be, okay, we are heading for some major issues, but usually it's one that drags the other one in. One will minimize, the other one will maximize. And so in that middle category is, hey, we better do something. Now, then the third category would be, if this doesn't work, we're going to get divorced. I've already made up my mind. And so having to differentiate between all of these. Now, there's toxic things that show up even in premarital couples. And so I will encourage both of them to look at these dynamics as a relationship dance. So that kind of takes away any kind of you're the victim, you're the perpetrator thing. So if they can become aware that, oh, this is a pattern, I didn't know this was going on, and they can both look at this covert abuse as, okay, this is something we need to really learn about and make sure our relationship doesn't have this. This was normal in my family of origin, and I certainly don't want this now. So if they're at that stage, that's a couple that I can work with. Okay, now here's what happens sometimes, though. I will give them, such as Lundy Bancroft's book, Why Does He Do That? And I preface it, I say, hey, you're going to get, to the man, this probably raise some anger issues, but you know what? And it takes an attitude of curiosity. So not that we're saying you're a bad person or anything like this, or that this is going, but let's just be open and aware. So if a man comes back and he's angry with me for recommending that book, and of course, then maybe I need to, so as a therapist, I'll think, well, maybe we can have a softer approach here, but they definitely need to be educated about this. But if there's pushback and entitlement, it's a problem. And then there have been times, I must say, in which I've told them, hey, it's going to be best for you to go to a separate marriage, or a separate individual therapist. I can't work with you anymore. So I've done that. As a therapist, so marriage therapy works when both individuals, both spouses can honor the otherness of the other. We are learning how to honor their individuality, how to hold the tension of differences. Now, sometimes those differences, and I've talked about this in my book, we all need to know that 100% of our conflicts are not going to be resolved. And with the research that I provide in my book, but I'll ask people, what do you think it should be? They say, well, 90% we should be able to resolve this, blah, blah, blah. Well, if even very core fundamental differences, even with healthy, growing, resilient couples, the ratio is 31% of their conflicts are resolvable. 69% are unresolvable. So
okay, so what does that mean? Unresolvable? Does that mean that they agree to disagree, or does that mean that they just sweep something that really matters to one of them under the rug?
It doesn't mean to sweep it under the rug. It does mean to honor them. Now, I know this is a group of Christian women. So if you have a non-Christian spouse, but that non-Christian spouse honors your faith, let's say that they're of a different faith, or maybe no faith at all. Can that marriage be more healthy than two Christians and one in which there's abuse going on? Yes. In other words, you're likely more equally yoked if your spouse, who may have a very different viewpoint, is fundamentally different. Okay, so that's maybe an extreme example, perhaps. Now, I talked with a couple, some friends, that they had been married for 40 years. And in a social setting, they look like, hey, I can kind of spot them a mile away, folks, whether they're like, there's a lot of tension on their faces in social settings. But this particular couple, they seem to, they've lived life, they've raised kids, they've gone through stuff. And, but I asked them, well, what is the secret? And see, she is a Democrat. Not only that, she is an elected official that's a Democrat, and he is a staunch Republican. So I asked him, well, how do you do that? And what they do is they find ways to partner, to equalize. They go hiking together, they climb mountains together, and it just evens out the partnership of their relationship. They've learned how to accept their otherness.
Is this content resonating with you? I've written a book for women of faith in destructive relationships called Is It Me? Making Sense of Your Confusing Marriage, a Christian woman's guide to hidden emotional and spiritual abuse. You can actually read reviews and find out more about my book on Amazon.com. It comes in paperback, Kindle, and Audible formats. I've also got a website specifically focused on helping women of faith find hope and healing. It's called flyingfreenow.com. I'll even give you the first 3 chapters of my book free if you want to hop on my mailing list at the top of my website. Those 3 chapters are going to help you figure out if your relationship is normal or destructive. Now, let's get back to our episode. Yes, I love that.
Yeah.
That's very important. So one of the things that I tell people, because people always say, well, how do I know? Like, what's the main thing that I need to know to figure out if I'm in a covert, emotionally abusive relationship? The thing that I tell people, and tell me what you think about this from your perspective. I tell people that it's in a covert, emotionally abusive relationship, one of the partners just cannot take responsibility for anything that they do. And they dehumanize the other person. They don't see the other person as a separate, differentiated individual that like you were just describing. They just kind of see the other person as almost as an object, I guess. The other person feels objectified. So the main thing though is that they don't take responsibility because the other person is objectified. They put all of the responsibility for that relationship and for anything that goes wrong onto the other person. Mm-hmm. So yeah. What do you think about that?
Well, and so some women I know choose to stay in that, but here's where I think the resolution needs to come. If you are going to stay in that type of thing. Now, I'm sure there's all kinds of stories. I mean, a person could come from maybe, her husband tried to kill her and then maybe she remarries and this person is still covertly abusive, the person whom she marries, but it is way better than perhaps her fearing for her life if she left. So there's degrees of emotional and covert abuse, as we all know. All right. So as a spouse grows, if she chooses to stay in that marriage. Now, some of us are going to be raising kids and these, or some of us might be in the empty nest stage of life. So those values that are so crucial at one stage of life may not be as crucial in another stage. So let's just say your kids are grown and he still, just depending on, well, what is he not taking responsibility? Is he not putting food on the table? Is he not paying the mortgage? Is he spending money frivolously? So there's all kinds of scenarios. But here's what I think a woman can do is she herself can surround herself with people, friends, girlfriends, groups, and make sure that she is validated in other places. If she's going to stay in that relationship and in the marriage, does that covert stuff happen just during times of stress, when other things are going on, or is that like a fundamental way that she is experiencing him? So she needs to develop her sense of self, her authentic self, and move forward, and not hang her hat on using her or her husband being the only mirror to her soul, so to speak.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, that's really good. Okay. So, if you're working with a woman like that, who's decided, I really, because of the stage of life I'm in, or because of my convictions or whatever, I'm going to stay in this relationship. It's problematic, but I'm going to stay anyways. How would you help her cope with the stress of being in that relationship? Besides like your advice about getting building other relationships that are actually validating to her and where people are seeing her and she is able to thrive in those relationships. That's really, really That's excellent advice. What about when she's at home though? Or what if she's not able, let's say that she's got small kids at home and her husband really doesn't like her to leave the house very much. What would you suggest for her to just deal with the stress at home?
Yeah, that's a really good question. See, this is a journey of awareness for all of us, Natalie. I'm sure some who've read your book and then they got this punch in the gut feeling, and it takes time to process. And people's level of readiness for leaving a relationship is going to be varied, or leaving the pattern. See, we're talking about divorcing the pattern of the toxic relationship pattern. So actually, and this is a real thing where, okay, a woman is so beat down and perhaps she's even gone, into inpatient hospitalization because her depression and anxiety is overwhelming. She's not ready to get out of that relationship until she herself is well. So, and this is, it's sad, but it's true. You got to have the stamina with which to experience the pushback, and not everybody is there, but they can be on this journey of being there. Does that make sense?
They can't really. How do they get well though when they're still breathing in that air?
Yes. Oh, I agree. So that's why one of our biggest enemies, Natalie, is isolation. And so, I use the acronym breathing in fresh air, which is our growth, which all of us are called to grow and to grow up, and every living thing is called to do that. We're not supposed to stay stagnant or stuck in whether it's depression or anxiety or anything. So it takes all of these three elements. Let me talk about them. A is the awareness. So reading your book or listening to this podcast, that is like, oh, these aha moments are coming up, or maybe even going through this, family of origin patterns and figuring out what your part of the dance is. Those are some aha moments that are so needed. And awareness is the very first thing we need to do. Then the I is intentionality. Okay, so then what's our next step? We plan. Maybe you need to plan on, okay, I've got X amount of dollars in my savings account, and I need to plan and interview 5 therapists and see which one's going to be the best for me. Or it might be planning a lunch date with somebody that, this is going to take a whole lot for me to disclose to my best friend who thinks things are fine, and I'm going to tell her the truth. So that was intentionality. You plan, you pray, you write, and intentionality might be something like keeping a journal and really getting your head clear. Oh, I'm in this crazy world, but let me just write this down. And that's what I've done for years, actually, and it's really helped. And then the R in air, breathing in air, awareness, intentionality, and the R is risk. What is the risk for me right now? And this is something that Brené Brown talks about when she talks about vulnerability. This is your journey toward your authentic self. It's going to be risky. It's going to be a very fearful thing because you don't know what the outcome is. And so what is that first risk you're going to take? Is it to call your friend up and have lunch with her and say, my marriage, I believe, is toxic and I am drowning? And so when you tell one person and they, they're trustworthy, number one, and they're not going to make you feel worse, but you look for friends that can handle you're the real you and the real what's going on. And so you start on that journey, and this is not a one-time thing. This is a pattern of breathing in fresh air every single day, meeting God in the midst of breathing in awareness, intentionality, and risk. Our lives are risky. There's nobody. And that's, I think, part of my own faith journey. I come from a very conservative Christian, certain spiritual principles. I identified a lot with you, actually, Natalie, reading your book and your journey. So okay, if I pray longer, or if I pray more, God's going to answer my prayer. Well, and then it was really profound when I went on a spiritual retreat with my spiritual director, and he said something that was very, I thought, almost heretical to me. He said, Judy, he said, God's love is not enough. And I thought, oh, wait, what does that mean? And so I named my ex-husband Richard in my book. And he said, God's love must be received. You cannot receive for Richard. He has to do that himself. So I was face to face with, okay, Lord, what do I need to receive from you? What do I need to say a wholehearted yes to? And that was a risk that I needed to take. I've got to tell you, and of course you're halfway through my book, so you might already know, it took me years. I've got four grown children. We as women, not for other guests, and you talk about this, is that, we are the caregivers, and oh my gosh, it's like we sacrifice so much for our children. But I think the biggest thing we can do for our children, our grandchildren, is to model this awareness, intentionality, risk. We model our own growth, our own resilience, and then we give them the courage to take risks themselves and continue to grow out of the family dynamics and the toxic stuff that has gone on or what they have been used to. So, yeah, God's not through with any of us yet.
No, I absolutely love that AIR acronym. And I can totally see that in my own life. I mean, it took me, I would say, from the time that I started waking up to what was actually going on. Obviously, that something's really bad your whole marriage. But when you start waking up and realize, oh, my word, this is what's happening. It took until the time I was out and thriving again. It was probably a 6-year journey. So it's not like when you read a book. I mean, I think this will really encourage some of you who are listening out there who this is the beginning of your journey. You maybe maybe you picked up my book or picked up another book and you started reading it and you're just beginning to realize, oh, my word, what's happening here? That doesn't mean that you are going to go out and file for divorce tomorrow. This is something that takes a long time. And I love that breathing in this air, breathing it out, that risk. It's not going to start with this big, huge risk of jumping off a cliff and filing for divorce. It's going to start with the risk of, like she said, telling someone what you're learning.
Yes.
Taking the time. It's scary to listen to a podcast like this and hear more information that makes you go, oh my word. Because once you realize that there's something wrong and it's serious, then you're faced with the fact that, oh my word, I have to do something. What am I going to do now? And that's a very, very scary realization. Just even realizing that and admitting that to yourself is a risk, that's a risk.
Absolutely. It is. And that's where it starts. And all of our journeys are different, and just honoring the process, because where I'm at the age that I am, and so I have not been a therapist through the first difficult marriage that ended after 29 years, but it was through my regular journal writing and, actually writing out my prayers. I mean, writing out my prayers was huge for me. And actually, my book, I did reference these stories, some that I had totally forgotten about, but that was my sanity, is to go to God in prayer, and not only that, to write them out. Now, there is some real value in handwriting in a journal, as opposed even to, keystroking on a computer app for a journal. There's something very powerful mental health wise to take your thoughts and your feelings and conceptualize them. And then you can ask yourself some questions, which I actually included in the book too, some questions that you can ask to test your automatic thoughts. This is a process. So really, I've got about 4 decades of prayer journals with which I've referenced. But by the time the time of my divorce of the first marriage, and by the way, I am still married to my husband now, my second husband, which that's another issue and another podcast I can tell you about, because some of these things from the, these same old, dance patterns sometimes show up.
Yeah.
But I say all that to say, it's like, by the time I was at a place where I had peace deep within my heart, even though I struggled hugely with theology. And of course, then I became a therapist and started private practice. Actually, the very same year of the divorce is crazy, but I had to provide for myself. And my dad died when I was 6 years old, and I had these thoughts sitting on the bleachers when my children were playing baseball, and we were basically living our life on the ball field. And I'm thinking, oh my gosh, this is not the kind of history and, childhood memories I want my kids to have. And then I got to thinking, well, you know what? My dad died suddenly after 6 weeks when I was only 6 years old. And I said, and so these were some thoughts that I had that I was able to take some of this stuff in the past. And I thought, my mom didn't have the time to prepare to be a widow. And I know that my marriage is, I thought, I may not have a marriage. And so that was years before I actually filed for divorce. But what I did is I began to take classes and get my master's degrees. And so this was a process. This was actually a risk for me to do all of this. I mean, to prepare myself. So I want everybody on this call to know, I have not always been a licensed professional counselor in private practice. This has been a journey for me, and it was a risky thing. So what can you do now? Maybe it is to have lunch with a healthy friend, or maybe it is for you to think, okay, how can I prepare myself to prepare for what might be inevitable, when the kids are at such and such an age.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. This has been so good, Judy. I'm so grateful for your time. Can you tell the listeners where they can find you? And also, you mentioned that you had some things that you were going to offer for them that would just add more value and that would take them even further than what this podcast can take them. Can you describe what you have for them?
Yes, and I can get those set of questions, what to ask a potential therapist. I can add that to what I was going to give away. So I'm going to give away, it's a personal timeline and family of origin patterns PDF, where it's a diagram and you can fill it in and use this as a model. And I'm likely going to, I'll give you plenty of instructions on how to do this, but it's to raise your level of awareness of the family of origin patterns that you have grown up with, and be gentle with yourself. Okay, so it's best to even ask yourself in your adolescent stage of life, how did you experience your mom and dad, and what got on your nerves, and what, so both, like, about 3 positives, 3 negatives to each one. So that's going to raise your level of awareness to get you grounded in your history. I do this all the time in my counseling office, and it's amazing when you put things in a diagram. You can have so many aha moments. It kind of gives you some objectivity, right, rather than being all caught up in not looking at these things. It can help. So that's one thing. And then also, I'm not sure when this is going to air, but my book is released September the 10th. And it would be awesome you can get it on Amazon, or you can get it at Books A Million or Barnes and Noble. And but between now and then, you certainly download the first 3 chapters of my book, and would love for you to stay in touch. I'm developing, I hope this is not overwhelming here, but I am beginning to develop excuse me, just a community. It's not a Facebook community, but it's called Mighty Networks. And if you'd like to join me there, I'd love to connect with you more, because I'm going to be trying out some more products, and would love some beta folks to do that with. So
that sounds wonderful. And by the way, the name of her book is Beyond Messy Relationships, Divine Invitations to Your Authentic Self by Judy K. Herman. Also, I will have all of those links to the places where you can sign up, where you can download the PDF, where you can sign up to get her the first 3 chapters of her book for free, and where you can sign up to join her community, in the show notes. So if you're listening on your phone, and you're not on my website right now, all you have to do is go to my website, which is flyingfreenow.com, click on the podcast link in the menu bar at the top, and that will take you to the podcast. This is podcast episode 34. So go to episode 34. And there where you will find all of these links and downloads.
Awesome. And as far as the URL for my website is judycounselor.com/flying free for those resources.
Okay.
And then if you forget, just go to messyrelationships.com.
Okay. We need to stop this podcast so that you can go get some water.
Yes, ma'am. I got it right now. I didn't want to cough on the phone. So anyway.
Thank you again, Judy.
My pleasure.
Yeah. And for the rest of you, fly free.